What's up, Taiwan? I'm Eric Gao, bringing you the news from here in Taipei. The government watchdog body is in hot water after several of its officials were caught using government cars for private errands. Though one of them has offered to resign, the political and possibly legal consequences are just starting to appear. John Van Trieste reports.
This building, the Control Yuan, is home to the government branch charged with handling ethics breaches. But today, it's at the center of its own ethics scandal. And backers of the opposition bloc are outside protesting and calling for a reckoning. Control Yuan officials have been caught using government cars for personal errands. One, Secretary General Li Junyi, has offered to resign for using government cars to take his dog to the pet salon and deliver a takeout order to his house. But protesters say at least 3 other Control Yuan officials also misused government cars. The Control Yuan says it will deal with these officials and has limited official car use for now.
有被揭露出来的3位，我们会先移送纪律委员会。那至于后面还有没有，那当然我们也无从，我也没办法去确认。
But this assurance hasn't quelled anger. And while the ruling Democratic Progressive Party has also said rules on car use should be enforced, the loudest voices come from the opposition. Criticism of the Control Yuan and calls for its abolition are not new and come from across party lines. But lately, the opposition Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party have been more aggressive, slashing the body's operating budget this year by 96%. The TPP leader questioned whether the Control Yuan will act impartially in this case.
监察院的这些御史大夫啊，会不会弹劾自家人啊？大家都在等着看嘛，是不是用同一个标准，还是只有监察院可以去弹劾其他公务员？
The Taipei District Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation of its own, meaning what happens is only partly up to the Control Yuan.
刑法上面嘛，那他可能有诈欺、侵占，等等的问题或背信。那在行政上面，他可能有一些惩戒或是弹劾的问题。
Even with one of the officials involved offering to resign, the fallout from this ethics scandal in the government's own watchdog may only be just the beginning. Klein Wang, Fu Huahong, and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Backlash is growing in Taiwan over a government plan to rename roads that were named after former authoritarian leader Chiang Kai-Shek. Critics are calling it a costly and symbolic gesture.
光是前期的行政作业费呢，初估就要110万，而这些只是行政作业费而已，还不包含招牌更新、地震登记修改，以及企业与商号营业登记异动，还有物流以及最重要的地图系统的同步调整，这些都是看不到的成本，而这些成本林林总总加起来，绝对是超过100万的成本。
The Interior Ministry recently announced plans to rename more than 300 Zhongzhen roads across Taiwan, Zhongzhen being another name for Chiang Kai-Shek. Officials say the move is part of broader efforts toward transitional justice.
转型正义呢，其实是一个人权的问题。既然是人权的问题的话，我们就要严肃的对待。如果有困扰的话，那大概就是要中央政府、地方政府还有在地的居民能够有共识，我们再来推动。
The government says it will contribute about $3,000 for each road that is renamed. Military leaders from around the world gathered in Singapore over the weekend for the Shangri-La Dialogue, Asia's top security forum. In a speech, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned of China's threat to Taiwan. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun skipped the forum, but China did hit back, saying Washington is deliberately antagonizing Beijing. To understand what's behind the exchange, our reporter Zalan Shatta spoke to Jia Yin-chong from the National University of Singapore.
The Chinese defense minister skipped the forum for the first time since 2019, sending a delegate instead. What's Beijing signaling about its commitment to regional dialogue?
One of the logical readings would be that the Shangri-La Dialogue or appearance at the Shangri-La Dialogue and having the bilateral meetings at the Shangri-La Dialogue is not of priority to Beijing right now, especially for the defense minister. But of course, there's no independent confirmation. There remains speculation. Some guess that there could be some sort of internal turmoil within the PLA, as we've seen with the recent purges of top PLA officials, military leaders. There is, of course, the possibility that the Chinese defense minister doesn't want to be put in a situation where he has to deal with US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at a time when negotiations between the US and the PRC are still at a fairly tense level, even though there's some abatement of the tariffs for the immediate period.
How are US-China tensions being discussed at the Shangri-La dialogue this year?
So US-China tensions are in the backdrop. They don't dominate everything. They do come out in certain areas. For instance, when the PRC talks about the South China Sea dispute or West Philippine Sea dispute it has with the Philippines, the PRC Beijing tends to blame the US for manipulating Manila, although there's no evidence for that. Now, at the same time, PRC also looks at the US as a force for instability in the region and accuses US alliance system for being destabilizing. The US, for its part, will talk about the PRC actions in the South China Sea, around Taiwan, and also in the East China Sea as, potentially provocative and potentially dangerous.
Taiwan is often talked about at these forums. What are the conversations regarding Taiwan this year?
There have been several conversations about Taiwan. One, drawing a link between security and stability in Europe with security and stability in Asia. So there's a comparison between what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening across the Taiwan Strait. Now, there's also been talk about how standing up against the Russians in Ukraine is a matter of democracy versus autocracy, rule of law versus authoritarianism. And that parallel has been made with regard to Taiwan.
We also saw a big European presence this year. What are the Europeans bringing to the table?
So the Europeans in particular, I suppose this year marked by French President Macron's presence at the Shangri-La as the keynote speaker, is a indicator of Europe's attempt and sort of interest in being a major international security player. At the same time, the European presence also represents East Asia's efforts to branch out and look at more partners on the security front, in addition to the United States and to some degree for some states, China, in order to have, I guess, a more balanced portfolio in terms of security cooperation.
That was Jia Yin-chong from the National University of Singapore. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping could speak soon as the two sides look to overcome trade issues. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CBS that the phone call would help resolve sticking points in the two countries' relationship. Bessent said China had not stuck to the terms of the Geneva Agreement that saw both sides walk back an escalating tariff war, calling out Beijing for withholding essential products. Beijing has denied breaking the terms of the agreement, saying it's the U.S. that has continued to put new limits on technology sold to China while revoking visas for Chinese students. The FBI is investigating a firebombing attack in the U.S. state of Colorado as a targeted act of terrorism.
It is clear that this is a targeted act of violence, and the FBI is investigating this as an act of terrorism.
The attack happened in the city of Boulder, where a man shouted "Free Palestine" and threw Molotov cocktails into a crowd. 8 people were injured, at least 1 seriously. The group had gathered for a weekly event to honor Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. It comes amid growing tensions in the U.S. over Israel's war in the territory. Members of Taiwan's LGBTQ+ community are heading to Tokyo for the Japanese capital's annual Pride Parade. As Rick Lau reports, they are hoping to showcase the full spectrum of Taiwan's colorful queer community.
Taiwan is known for its LGBTQ+ rights. This was the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, and it's host of the largest Pride Parade in the region every October. But now members of the community are preparing to take the show on the road. This is the team heading to Tokyo this weekend for the annual Tokyo Rainbow Pride Parade. They're hoping to showcase the diversity of Taiwan's LGBTQ+ community and to share some of Taiwan's most famous things, such as Taiwan's highest mountain, Yushan, and its famous semiconductor industry.
我们邀请了8个不一样的 model， 那这个8个 model 有不同的性别、不同的年龄、不同的性别展现，然后我们是穿着共同的一组的服装，然后希望能够展露同志是多元的这个样貌。
我们希望用一个很多元的方式来告诉 诉这个世界，然后跟日本站在同一个线上，用同样的眼光去展望 LGBTQ 在发展的未来。
Since Taiwan's landmark legalization of same-sex marriage, activists here have been working with their partners across the region to help promote better LGBTQ rights, whether it's same-sex marriage or better protections for gender and sexual minorities. But this weekend, they're also hoping to show that they know how to bring a party. Luffy Li and Rick Lauert in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's first ever lunar device is scheduled to land this week. The radiation probe is aboard a lander made by Japan's iSpace, which is vying to become Asia's first private firm to make it to the moon. Joyce Sun will be in Tokyo bringing us the latest on that landing. But first, let's take a look at how we got here. In this excerpt from TaiwanPlus's new show, Small Island Big Ideas, we explore the state of the global space race and how even relatively small countries like Taiwan are getting in on it.
Traditionally, when we think about the space race, we think about the US and the Soviet Union back in the 1950s.
You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite.
The launch of the Sputnik satellite in October 1957 set off this technological and geopolitical contest between the two rival superpowers of the time. Then came US President John F. Kennedy and his pledge to put a man on the moon before the Russians did.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
In terms of showcasing technological strength, very few things match up to making it into outer space. But how do you measure space superiority? Of course, there's successfully sending up a man to walk on the moon, and to this day, the United States is the only one to have done it. But before you send up an astronaut into such a harsh environment, you have to make sure that the spacecraft and all of its components can survive the journey and work. Now, the everyday grind of aerospace lies in something called flight heritage. Now, that's basically a mileage count of a new component or system traveling in space. And that serves as a valuable record to prove that the device works and works reliably under such harsh conditions. Accumulating flight heritage helps inform future missions and builds credibility for the device or payload and its maker. Today, we're seeing a renewed, different kind of space race. China is an active player, having launched hundreds of satellites into space, sending astronauts into space, and putting landers on the moon 4 times. In 2023, India joined that prestigious list, becoming the 4th nation to land on the moon with the Chandrayaan-3 mission.
जी हाँ, आप अपनी स्क्रीन पे देख सकते हैं कि हम लैंडर मॉड्यूल
At the same time, there's also a booming commercial space sector that has revolutionized the game. That's dominated by Elon Musk's SpaceX, whose reusable rockets have significantly cut down on launch costs, making space more accessible. There's also Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, which has a special focus on space tourism, a market projected to be worth almost $7 billion by 2030. With these private spaceflight opportunities, that means there are more chances for different stakeholders, like smaller countries, to go to space and build up their flight heritage, including Taiwan. Under President Lai Ching-te, making headway in the global space sector is a national mandate.
第二个方向是竞逐太空，探索海洋。
Tune in tomorrow as we take a closer look at Taiwan's first moon probe. And the full episode of Small Island Big Ideas will premiere next week. Search Taiwan Explained by TaiwanPlus on YouTube. And thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Finally, let's visit the Metropolitan Museum in New York to explore its recently reopened African art collection. I'm Eric Au. Take care. We'll see you next time.